with the as Padampa Sangyé gave these teachings, he's giving them these teachings with a complete, I think, assurance that these people have everything that's required, namely the faith and the openness. It's a little bit different for us who come from a culture where the notion of spiritual practice is rather an unknown. So we presumably have to go through a fair bit more of, you could say, inquiry and questioning and so forth. But anyway, what we have here is really, you could say, Buddha in the palm of the hand, and the the implication really is that this is something that we'd want to join up with our practice. This is not particularly theoretical, but very much based on um, the scope of meditators. So, verse 60 reads, "Thoughts of attachment and aversion are like rainbows in the sky. People of Tingri, there is nothing in them to be grasped or apprehended. Unexamined, we are driven by thoughts of craving or hatred. When examined, we see thoughts are baseless. And when we sustain such insights, thoughts lose their hold on us." So this is, again, you could say, the two approaches to Vipassana, one analytical meditation and the other settling meditation. But there's always something very humbling about seeing ourselves, or in general just observing what it's like to be obsessed or incensed. And when this happens, this drives all the crimes that we have in this world. When we have this hatred for the other, the one tribe against the other tribe, one ideology against another, and so forth, all of this comes from taking this sense of I and mine as being solid and the other as equally solid, and then comes this alienated situation of fear, and this is where we then become incensed, furious, angry, or irritated. Or if we want something, we have attachment and obsession and so on. Now, all of this comes from us gullibly being slaves to our thinking. And this we can do something about. We can see through this myth when we examine the nature of these thoughts. We can see that what it is that actually drives us is something that has no tangible quality. And we can see that what we are is merely driven by impulse. So we're like children chasing rainbows. But of course, this has disastrous ramifications very often, as we've seen in the news, and also something that we see close at hand. So if we look closely at these thoughts, then eventually that will dissolve their strength. And if we then practice meditation, training with this view, then these impulses will lose their authority over us. By the way, I think this was the last one last time, so I apologize for repetition. I was just thinking, this time I won't have to go back and sort of do something that was unfinished. Anyway, it's an important point, so I hope it's all right. The mind's movements dissolve by themselves like clouds in the sky. People of Tingri, in the mind there are no reference points. The sky is untouched by clouds. The nature of mind is untouched by thoughts. Thoughts arise as the clarity or cognizant quality of the empty mind. Thoughts are naturally empty. Thoughts and emptiness are naturally indistinguishable. So we need to realize that thoughts arise and dissolve just like clouds. And last time we actually saw the advice that Milarepa gave to Lady Paldabum, which also is similarly about recognizing how the sky-like mind is untouched by the arising, which are like clouds. So when we have these clouds that arise in the sky, what we want to notice is that the the sky is not in any way affected. The sky in and of itself is not affected by the presence of the clouds. And also it's not as if the sky is a better sky once there's no clouds. So the nature of the mind is like that. Of course, we fixate on our thoughts. So we're training here, but we need to have this view. So we need to be quite certain about, as per the previous sloka, that we can see that the thoughts have no reality. And as such, then, the presence or absence of the thoughts actually doesn't, you could say, taint or improve the nature of this mind. There is nothing about what this mind creates, and no phenomena in general that can be grasped. The mind is empty, and yet mind has a capacity to manifest. This is what we call the clarity aspect. But basically, when we say, and this is an important point actually, when we say the clarity of the mind, it generally just refers to this manifesting cognizant quality of the mind. Just the fact that the mind is there. It doesn't. The term Tibetan salwa doesn't really imply that we are feeling clear as opposed to feeling dull. So when we say the clarity aspect of the mind, we're not really talking about mind in a particular lucid or sober condition. It's really just that it knows, this naked cognizant quality. So it just means knowing. But this lack of substance, this intangible quality of the mind, and the fact that it has this cognizance, these two qualities are entirely indistinguishable. So there's no need to begin to think of the mind in terms of emptiness as different from this knowing. These two qualities are no differences, rather just that when we think we get impressed or overwhelmed or caught by the manifestations of the mind, this is where we then apply the analysis or the view of emptiness. But at the same time, when we say emptiness, we're not talking about a void or a blankness. So this inseparability of clarity and emptiness, this is the nature of mind. Again, this nature is not something that we need to think or what would we say? It's not something that we construct. This reality is not something that's created or even grasped by the ordinary conceptual mind. So we don't actually need the conceptual mind to realize this. We need the conceptual mind to remove doubts, but then the actual practice of meditation is, in the settling practice of settling vipassana or settling meditation, it's not something that is done with the conceptual mind. Hence, fortunate are those who have been introduced to the practice of sitting practice and familiarize themselves with nothing happening, cool boredom. Because this understanding, this experience is then essential for any kind of meditation that we do. And although there is then nothing about this that is philosophical, we still refer to it as the view. So again, clouds might seem so real that we feel we can walk on them, yet they are, as we know, insubstantial, and likewise thoughts. When we realize this, it means that we're not caught by the thoughts. Good thoughts arise, we're not particularly impressed. Negative thoughts arise, we're not particularly impressed either. And we say that appearance and emptiness, or arising and dissolution, are simultaneous. Without fixation, thoughts are freed by themselves, like the wind, people of Tingri, which never clings to an object. We should let thoughts pass through our mind, just like wind in space leaves no trace. With that realization, we have no karmic patterns, no moving from simplicity. So as we know, then when the wind blows through space. It doesn't settle anywhere in space. So likewise also then, we should simply let thoughts pass through our mind without leaving any trace. There was this quote last week from the Sadhana Mahamudra where it says, what is it again? All thoughts dissolve into emptiness like the imprint of a bird in the sky. So likewise also then, wind doesn't leave any imprint. Then thought, when we have that, then the thoughts arise, but in that we're not driven by them. We also don't attribute these some particular validity. We don't begin to have kleshas, and as a consequence also, we're not driven in particular actions, into particular karmic patterns. And so the more that we do this, the more free we are. So this doesn't mean that we realize the Dharmakaya, but it means that once when we're not caught by thoughts to such an extent, we discover how we're not caught in particular patterning. We have more freedom, free will. So in such a state then, we can have some sense of confidence and perhaps realization of this innate simplicity, and then this is where we don't move from this simplicity. Pure awareness is without fixation. Like a rainbow in the sky, people of Tingri experiences arise quite unimpededly. Like a vivid yet ungraspable rainbow, mind is empty yet cognizant. As long as there is grasping, there is no realization. We should never fixate on any arising or experience of the mind. So we might say, oh, now we've heard this a few times, but there's actually continually subtle aspects to this. And so this is continually about integration of this vision, this view. So this being the most important thing we could ever do, we should appreciate these very succinct words of instruction. What we call naturally liberated awareness is beyond all conceptual constructs, as we've seen before, and this also means that these ordinary assumptions about our reality, such as time, space, that things come into existence and go out of existence, that things have reality, that they have no reality, and so forth. All of these are just labels, conceptual constructs, and they have no more reality than a rainbow. A rainbow is something that is manifest, yet it's completely ungraspable, utterly empty. And so likewise also this mind that we have is utterly graspable, utterly ungraspable, but it has this vivid cognizant quality we're experiencing, right? So we're not denying the experience, but we are identifying the problem when we objectify and grasp. So in the Sakya tradition, they say, in parting from the four attachments, it says, the fourth of the parting of the four, you could say, pith instructions in this cycle of teaching, it says, the last one is, where there is attachment, there is no view. And this means that any conceptual notion prevents any direct experience of reality. So this nature is not something that even the Buddhas, they haven't seen it. This is from the third Karmapa, Rangjung Dorje's prayer of Mahamudra, and also we find it in Jigme Lingpa's Mahasandhi aspiration. So there it says, it doesn't have existence as even the Buddhas have not seen it. It is not non-existent as it is the basis of all of samsara and nirvana. So As long as we see the mind in terms of this is really happening in my mind, then we're still deluding ourselves. So again, with this example of the rainbow, it manifests vividly, yet is empty like the sky itself. So when we have these experiences as we're practitioners, it seems that we're sometimes making progress and sometimes we're, how do you say, having setbacks. Whatever might happen of experience like that on the path, all of this is without reality. And Kyabje Dilgo Khyentse then says, the saying goes, meditators taken in by their experiences are like children lured by a rainbow. So he says, lend no importance to such experiences, and they will never be able to lead you astray. So as we practice, we'll have encouraging experience and discouraging moments, and we should not see this as being any more real than the perceptions of a rainbow. Realization of the absolute nature is like the dream of a mute. People of Tingri, there are no words to express it. The nature of mind cannot be described. It defies the expressions of language and thought. This is what we call sometimes Dharmakaya. This is sometimes the nature of mind. We have a lot of expressions for this. The Great Middle Way, Prajnaparamita, the mother of all the Buddhas, and so on and so forth. But the nature of this reality is something that cannot be grasped. So it's very vivid, real in terms of experience, just like the dream by a mute person or a mute person tasting molasses. Yet it's not something that can be expressed. So Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, he says, the ultimate nature of the mind defies all description and cannot be grasped by discursive thought. Realization is like a youthful maiden's pleasure. People of Tingri, the joy and bliss just cannot be described. Realization brings freedom and satisfaction, and such realization is, like we saw before, inexpressible, beyond words. Rinpoche says, with the dawn of realization, the mind becomes perfectly free, at ease, fulfilled, vast and serene. This realization, however, is inexpressible, like the joy of an adolescent in the flower of youth. Clarity and emptiness are united, like the moon reflected in water. People of Tingri, there is nothing to be attached to and nothing to impede. Mind is the unity of emptiness and cognizant experience. Being unobstructed, it is unceasing. Being unobstructing, it allows all appearances. So all what we experience, and we use a word in Buddhism which seems incredibly generic, and that's because it applies to everything, and it's the word phenomena. It might sound slightly theoretical and academic, but it just means all things. But it means everything that we can perceive. So we say all things, all phenomena, are the display of mind, as the empty creativity of the mind. Now this is where we say mind doesn't have any absolute graspable reality, but as far as all these perceptions go, all our so-called experience of world and life world, this is all what we call the creativity of the mind. So we give, as you might have now gathered, that we give, you could say, primacy to consciousness, and the so-called solidity of the so-called objective world is really just the solidity that's attributed by this subjective consciousness. And as such, then, all this display lacks any essence, and this is what we call emptiness. And while this happens, that there's nothing to be grasped, it's a fact that we experience, and this is then what we call clarity. But we never have anything that's perceived that is not empty, and we never have just a obstructing empty space in which then nothing arises. There's continual things, there's continual stuff, there's continual phenomena, and yet none of it is substantial. So when we talk about unity of appearance and emptiness, we can see for ourselves that these are inseparable. Now, this is something that we need to have as a this is something we need to investigate, and that's the pain of this. We're not encouraged to just believe blindly. And of course, we, coming from a culture then, has a very different view, namely the primacy of matter. This is what you could say is a difficult to prove thesis, but so it does actually remain as what we could call a metaphysical belief, and that is what underpins the general so-called modern science, what we could call a materialist science or scientific materialism. So we, from the modern world, we particularly have to do an additional set of homework. It's not as if everybody we rely on, they will tell us, oh yes, everything that arises and appears is a display of mind's cognizant clarity. So, however, then, we understand now that this appearance and its empty nature appears as a moon reflected in water, where the moon is vividly there, yet obviously it's not in the water. So mind is vivid, yet ungraspable. Kyabje Dilgo Khyentse, he says, by its very nature, which is the indivisible union of emptiness and clarity, nothing can obstruct the mind, and mind can obstruct nothing. Unlike a solid object such as a rock, with a physical presence occupying space and excluding other objects, in essence, the mind is insubstantial and omnipresent. So this applies when we analyze mind itself, its cognizant quality. The example Rinpoche gives here of the rock refers to us thinking that the emptiness of the mind could be something solid like a rock that would prevent phenomena to arise, or that there would be something solid, tangible about the mind that equally is tangible. Appearances and emptiness, inseparable are like the empty sky. People of Tingri, the mind is without center or periphery. We experience a world, yet it has never truly existed. Mind, like space, accommodates everything. Like space knows neither center nor periphery, mind knows neither space nor time. So for all the vivid experience of phenomena that we have, and with that, and this is where this is not theoretical at all, because in conjunction with all this stuff, all these things, we have admittedly reactive patterns of we have happiness or we have displeasure, suffering. So we want to now look if there is any reality in these experiences. So just as space can accommodate entire worlds, so too the mind accommodates all these manifestations. And just like the space, we cannot find any center or periphery, then also the mind is not limited in any way by time and space. So we're also not here thinking about any of these things. We're not thinking that they ever came into actual existence like through a Big Bang. We're saying that if we look, they never have acquired any reality. The mind, with no thought and no distraction, is like the mirror of a beauty. People of Tingri, it is free of any theoretical tenets. Naked awareness is untouched by arising, like a mirror is untouched by the reflections. Hence, we are free from philosophical positions and conceptual constructs. And, as Nagarjuna famously said, outrageously, as I have no view, I have no flaw. It's translated slightly differently here. Anyway, the point really is that we have here meditation instructions, and Padampa Tingri is just making a point that the role of philosophy, you could say, has been, we've moved on from that. So we don't really need a conceptual, you could say, sealant, or how do you say, a concept to confirm the validity of what we're doing. We act with the actual experience of the nature of mind. We have no need to modify or justify what we're doing. Just resting like that, there is no need for meditation with effort or object, whatever it might be. In this kind of meditation, we're not concerned with any particular mind training or visualization. Mind itself is without delusion. So this awareness is something that is not constructed, it's unconditional, and as such it's untouched by pleasure or displeasure. So it's just like the mirror a young pretty woman might have, in which the mirror itself is untouched by pretty or ugly reflections. Um, the the reason why we say the mirror of beauty is possibly a very pragmatic Tibetan angle that nobody except just a young pretty woman could be bothered to have a mirror. You could say vanity not being sort of exactly a national what could you say, fault of the Tibetans. Not entirely, but anyway, you could say Padampa Sangye discussing this in the 10th century village, possibly so there wasn't a lot of mirrors around. Anyway, the point is here then that we are not establishing a conceptual reference point. We're simply just leaving the mind as it is. I don't know if anybody saw last week, there was a discussion between some scientists and His Holiness the Dalai Lama at the Jawaharlal Nehru University in Delhi. And one of the participants, a French philosopher of science, Michel Pitbol, was making the point how actually both in the case of quantum physics and also in the case of Madhyamika, the middle way, we actually don't operate with a view. We actually don't operate also with any, you could say, independent objective reference. So this kind of, under this vision that you find in quantum physics is also, you could say, a common ground, a shared area with the Madhyamika philosophy. Of course, in Madhyamika, we proceed on to the realization of this as a way of addressing delusion and suffering, whereas quantum physics generally just remains within the realm of theoretical science. But anyway, there's, you could say, basis for discussion, and this is probably quite helpful for a lot of us who, you could say, bridge these two paradigms. So Khyentse just says, indeed, a true realization of the ultimate nature of things goes utterly beyond any concept of being or non-being. Hence, Nagarjuna said in root stanzas of the Middle Way, since I affirm nothing, no one can refute my point of view. So we're halfway, so we'll just see if there's any questions. Okay. So there's a question here. Padampa Sangyé seems to emphasize that experience the various emotions causes a lot of negative karma. This book certainly doesn't talk directly about working with difficult emotions like anger very much. Any comments on that? Yeah, this presumes a certain, you could say, experience with meditation. So, of course, to sort of go into the analysis of this, you have the Abhidharma, you have Madhyamika, and so forth. But nevertheless, this book continually actually does talk about the experience of working with difficult emotions like anger. So everything that we're saying here really presumes that this is for practitioners. And so while it's not in philosophical language, it is directly discussing this. And that's why we, in the, what was it, stanza 60, talked about how we actually gullibly are fascinated by our emotions and we're driven by the impulses of these emotions. And that's where he gives very particular advice on how to see through the hoax of these emotions. And also, this is then where we understand that these emotions, these impulses, they drive our actions and hence then create these patterning of our actions, which is then karma. So so I would say have a look, take a fresh look at particularly then stanza 60, which really is, you could say, again, quintessential instruction there on dealing with difficult emotions. So, yeah, that's it. All right. Awareness and emptiness, inseparable, are like reflections in a mirror. People of Tingri, nothing is born there and nothing ceases. And actually coming back to what we were just discussing, all of these references to phenomena, all these references to thoughts as clouds in the space of the sky, um, this really refers to our experiences of thoughts, and once we actually have been really pursuing thoughts, then the ensuing emotions. And what we're continually coming back to is introducing that this is no more real than reflections. This is no more real than a dream. So everything we see here in terms of these pith instructions, they should be taken as, you could say, pithy lines to completely embrace all aspects of our emotionality and all our psychological experience. There's nothing that's excluded. This is not like a refined project divorced from the brutal reality of our emotionality. This is at the heart of the matter. So awareness and emptiness, awareness and emptiness, inseparable, are like reflections in a mirror. People of Tingri, nothing is born there, nothing ceases. Emptiness and clarity are one, like a mirror and its reflection. Like reflections in a mirror, thoughts have no actual existence. They neither arise nor cease. While transforming our mind through the path, the nature of mind doesn't change. So we've already established that this mind is not something void. It's rather this vivid cognizant, this experiencing mind, which is vivid, and yet nothing in our experience can be grasped as substantial. So awareness and emptiness are not two. Again, as per the Heart Sutra, appearance, form is emptiness, emptiness is form, form is no other than emptiness, and emptiness is no other than form. They are inseparable as a mirror and its reflections. These manifestations of thought, they are like when we have a reflection in a mirror, it seems completely real. And that's where we gullibly are sort of assuming that there is truly a face in the mirror. There are some stories. There's a Japanese story about this woman who passed away, and she gave her daughter her mirror as a parting present when she passed away. And the daughter was missing the mother, but every time then that she would hold up the mirror, she would see the face of her mother when her mother was young, thinking that her mother was really there. So we are like that. We think that these phenomena, they're really there. The thing is, just like there's nothing really taking place in the mirror, then these phenomena also don't really have any, they had never come into existence. Of course, we're habituated through psychology and in general, you could say, to attribute historicity and sort of reality to our memories in regards to the past. What we're saying here is that phenomena of the past, of the present, and the future, they have no reality. They have never actually come into existence. So this also applies to all the various stages that we go through in terms of confusion. As we begin the path, then the path where our confusion is mixed with insight, and then eventually liberation, that these various stages then, they appear in this space of the mind, but the nature of the mind, the space of reality, never changes. Rinpoche says, throughout all the stages of the path, although it might look as if some transformation is taking place, the nature of the mind itself never changes. It is not corrupted at the beginning of the path, it is not improved at the end. So this is like when we discuss Buddha nature, or when we discuss this, you could say, space of phenomena dharma dhatu. Bliss and emptiness, inseparable, are like the sun lighting up the snows. People of Tingri, there is nothing there to apprehend. So bliss, we say, is innate to realization as sunlight is innate to the brightness of snow. Emptiness cannot be grasped, and likewise neither can bliss. So when we have then this image of sun shining on a snow mountain, the question is, can we distinguish between the light coming from the snow and the sunlight? They are completely inseparable. Likewise, we say bliss arising from the realization of the mind's nature is indistinguishable from emptiness itself. Realization is not something that comes about through grasping. It's the result of the absence of grasping, and hence also this nature of bliss that arises. If we cling to it, well, then we're grasping, and that will be a very short-lived experience of bliss. And in the case of realization, where we've eliminated grasping, then this blissful nature is also not something that we objectify. We don't think, my bliss. Khyentse Rinpoche, he says, dazzling though it is, the brilliance of the snow is not something you can hold in your hands. So, of course, we might, from some conventional point of view, we might say, oh yeah, the sunlight, this is sunlight and so forth, but and likewise also we could say, oh, this is bliss. But the point really is that for a sage and someone with realization, then there's not really any grasping at this. Deluded talk will fade without a trace, like echoes. People of Tingri, in sound there is nothing to be grasped. We take praise and blame very seriously. Yet when we look, praise and blame are empty sounds. Praise and blame are unworthy of the slightest attention. So honestly, we have attachment to being praised and we have dislike of blame. And these two actually stand in stark contrast to the fact that in reality these are nothing but empty sounds, again just appearances on the surface of a mirror, just like an echo. They appear yet they have no reality. And yet, gullible as we are, we react to these. This is wonderful. This is something we can test in our ordinary lives. But we should not just react, we should actually train ourselves in going through this. And we should think how ridiculous it is when we swell with pride or we take offense on criticism, right? Rinpoche says, praise and blame are only empty sounds, unworthy of the slightest attention. And also there's His Holiness Dujun Rinpoche that says one place, when someone speaks of us, either praising us or blaming us, we should just think that they're talking about somebody who's dead, someone who's not here anymore. Happiness and suffering. Through a mechanism like the sounding of lutes, body, and strings, people of Tingri are produced when actions are combined with necessary conditions. Happiness and suffering, they come about through causes and conditions. We need to know how to skillfully apply the Dharma like playing an instrument. The Dharma may not conform to our habitual demands for gratification, but Dharma leads to bliss. So this is where we understand then, as much as sound and phenomena are empty, they still appear on the basis of particular causes and conditions. Like Tonsikens Rinpoche, he would say, phenomena appear, they have no reality, no more reality than the reflection in a mirror. Yet if we go in front of the mirror, it's not as if we're going to look into the mirror and see a banana. So likewise also we realize that whatever appears, that it comes about through very particular causes and as a result, very particular results. So this means that we need to become skillful in working with these causes and conditions. Just as then playing the lute requires skill. Rinpoche says, approaching the Dharma with an undisciplined thirst for gratification will work no better than fervent attempts to make music by the clumsy random plucking of a musical instrument's strings. So anybody who's picked up an instrument they don't know and just think, wow, it sounds so wonderful, and then you start sort of strumming it or whatever, and quickly you realize how it really takes skill to make this sound beautiful. So on a relative level then, as our happiness and our suffering, they intrinsically are without substance, then they appear fluidly on the basis of these changing conditions that we provide. So the law of cause and effect is something that we need to be aware of and use this awareness of this law. Just as a musician then bases his or her music on the laws of harmony. Now, as far as you could say the instant gratification goes, then yes, there are some mushrooms that look tasty but are toxic. And likewise also then apparent pleasures, they often end with disappointment. So, and conversely, some excellent medicines are very bitter, yet they have great curative effect. So likewise, the practice of Dharma, even though it's not made to gratify our demands and our senses, our expectations, nevertheless, the practice of Dharma leads to indestructible bliss. So we need to make clear then on the choices we make and the actions. The natural freedom of samsara and nirvana is like a children's game. People of Tingri have a mind without any aims. We need to see that our kleshas are empty, just as the qualities of enlightenment. No phenomena exists inherently. We see this if we analyze. Yet we habitually react to phenomena, taking our experiences so seriously. Why not once and for all put down the heavy burden of our likes and dislikes? So if we take the trouble then to actually examine these negative emotions, anger, hatred, irritation, All the kinds of moods, desire, obsession, wanting, or jealousy, or resentment, pride, whatever it might be, all of these afflicted states of mind, what we call kleshas, and these are not innocent, you could say, entities of our mind, because it's what drives our actions, and as a result, what we call kleshas and karma then drives our samsaric existence, our samsaric experience. Now, if we analyze what it is that lies at the root of these kleshas, we find nothing but emptiness. We've been deceived. Realizing this fully is then liberation, nirvana, enlightenment. Now, this nirvana, enlightenment, is replete with all the qualities of enlightenment as we see it reflected in great sages. We see wisdom, we see compassion, we see strength, intelligence. So we see this in persons, and also this is what's intrinsic to the idea of the Vajrayana mandalas, where we see this vast wisdom of emptiness displayed then as all these various deities, mandalas, and so forth. So what we want to appreciate here is that even these qualities of enlightenment, also these are nothing that can be grasped. Like we looked at bliss before. There's nothing to be grasped here. And that's where we established that the enlightened qualities, they just like the effects of samsara, they're also empty. So the realization of emptiness brings about these enlightened qualities. And yet we don't grasp them. The Dalai Lama doesn't think, gosh, what a wonderful, compassionate person I am. Simply just this adorns this, you could say, complete simplicity. So both samsara and nirvana are empty of intrinsic existence. Neither can be found if we investigate this reality. So we should see the world just like a child who's free from any concepts about good and bad, pretty and ugly. And we should be then free from desire and repulsion. Again, we can see this is what is at work in a sage. So why do we always struggle with all of this reaction? Khyentse Rinpoche says to get what they want and be rid of what they dislike. Look how people throw themselves into torments like moths plunging into the flame of a lamp. Would it not be better to put down your heavy burden of dreamlike obsessions once and for all? Your notions of the outer world derive from the mind within. People of Tingri, let the solid ice be melted into liquid. So as we know, so ice forms due to water freezing. Samsara forms due to ignorance of the mind. As when ice thaws, so the rigidity of dualistic mind dissolves through practice. With practice, our mind and our perceptions become easy and fluid. So as we know then, ice and water, they're not two different things. But due to the conditions, then certain conditions, then we have ice that is hard and brittle. So likewise then, our mind, with the conditions of ignorance, becomes rigid and tormented. And with that then, our perceptions of the world reflect that attitude, this rigid and tormented subjectivity, and we see this external world then in a solid way as being truly good, truly bad. Once we begin to dismantle these ignorant concepts and assumptions through then, as we've seen, analysis and meditation, this rigidity of our experience melts. And just like water, our minds and our perceptions mingle, and we experience fluidity and brilliance in dealing with our world. So this, again, applies to us practicing. The mechanism of ignorance is like the gush of a meadow spring. People of Tingri, it cannot be halted by obstructing it. We need to see through our belief that person and phenomena have reality. A compartmentalized view of emptiness as a belief will not help. We train in meditation to be unaffected by thoughts and perceptions. So the truth is, we have a stubborn habit of ignorant beliefs. We need to acknowledge that. And now, for once, actually take a hard look at reality. This, of course, is difficult for modern people since we have been brought up on this scientific materialism and this belief that there's an objective reality. But again, as we know, there are pockets of science that actually challenge this assumption. It is commonly known now through quantum physics that this apparent external reality is tied up with our subjectivity. So we need to properly look at what the Buddha then is teaching here and identify how this so-called subjective I, what we call mind, and this subjective other, what we call phenomena, has no reality whatsoever. Some of you read Churning the Depths of Hell, this confession practice. There is a place where it also speaks about how intrinsically mind is Samantabhadra, and how intrinsically phenomena is Samantabhadri's consort, Samantabhadri. But we need to establish this, and then it doesn't help that we then have some sort of just compartmentalized Buddhist belief in emptiness. Khyentse Rinpoche says the hold that this belief has on you is too strong for you to be able to free yourself from. You cannot simply deny that these entities simply exist. So we need to acknowledge that we take things, we take ourselves, we take phenomena very real, but then we need to actually properly have a look. It's not going to just go away just because we have sort of a great aha moment. So that's what we need then to establish. But this means that we begin to include all of our reality. It's not like we have this refined meditation enlightenment project going one way and then we have all this sort of uncomfortable truth about our reaction somewhere else. So we cannot block out the nature of reality and instead impose this conceptual lid. We shouldn't keep torturing ourselves with this alienation and fear about our own mind. We'll never get close to peace or enlightenment in this way. So we need to be clear on what the nature of the mind is, of phenomena, and we need to then face this. We need to establish beyond any doubt the empty nature of our thoughts and how they never have possessed any reality, and hence that there's nothing that needs to go away. Khyentse Rinpoche used to tell this anecdote about a man who was having a nightmare, and in it there's this great ogre that's crawling up on him and about to devour him. And the man screams out in the nightmare, he screams out, "Are you going to eat me now?" And the ogre says, "I don't know, it's your dream." So the thing is that these things that we struggle with, they actually have never achieved, they never have any reality. There is no ogre out there. There's nothing that we actually need to go away. So no matter how many thoughts and no matter what they are, once we are clear on this point, then it's obvious to us that they cause no harm, they're no threat. Thoughts will neither spoil our meditation, emotions will not corrupt our meditation, and also our meditation is not going to be improved when we have no emotions or no thoughts. It's like when we travel, then the train or the plane is not slowed down by the fact that it's passing by through towns or countrysides. It has no preference. So we should be unaffected and undisturbed by thoughts as we're meditating. Now it's important that we realize this doesn't mean that we become desensitized, then that we have this, that we're unaffected by thoughts and perceptions. Rather, it means that we cease to be wound up in our own reactional patterns. And when we are free of this, it enables us to be more fully present in our experiences. And this also then frees up wisdom and compassion then when we're extending ourselves to others. So this is very much all about liberation, and with that, wisdom and compassion. The delusions of samsara and nirvana are like coming face to face with an enemy. People of Tingri, as your ally, practice virtue. Samsara and nirvana come about through ignorance. They are delusions. Delusions are driven by ignorance. This is the general that moves the armies of samsara. We need to defeat this general with the help of the teacher and our practice. So I apologize at this point. I'm going to be going a little bit over time. I hope that's all right. So here the point is that we should see through this primitive notion of samsara as something to be forcefully rejected, and samsara as something that has to be achieved through hard work. Then we should look into the reality of this. Of course, we're going to work with our habitual patterns, but we should have a clear, you could say, aerial perspective on this, which is then what we call the view. And we should see that all of this that we're going through is a delusional condition that's caused by an initial not looking, by ignoring or ignorance. So just like if we capture the general, then the whole army surrenders. We likewise want to get to the bottom of this ignorance. And to do so, we then need the aid of the teacher's instructions to us, and our practice. So with that, then, we can purify this delusional condition and unveil enlightened qualities. The natural clarity of the 5 kayas is like the expanse of a continent of gold. People of Tingri, have no hope or doubt, attachment or aversion. So the qualities of enlightenment are already spontaneously present in the mind. Do not look elsewhere. Everything is here. Neither be discouraged about the veils that obscure this nature. Never be discouraged about the veils that obscure this nature, and never give up. Settle in certainty, and the qualities will flourish. So these dimensions of enlightenment, what we refer to as kayas, are innate to our mind. We talk about generally that enlightenment comes with what we call kayas and jhanas, bodies or dimensions, and wisdoms. So again, enlightenment is not just a blank void, it's vividly rich with all this entire array. And it's only when we, out of ignorance, cling to this narrow notion of self alienated with regards to other, that we actually filter out the brilliance of reality, and we live this half-life that we call samsara. But although we experience this shadowy existence of samsara, the nature of reality doesn't go away. Just because we have some dark shades on, it doesn't actually condition or change the outer reality. So these dimensions of enlightenment, they're intrinsic to us. They're not found as something external to us or something that we need to acquire. And when we recognize these inner qualities, then delusion vanishes. There's no enlightenment besides that. So in the classical Indo-Tibetan Buddhism, we have this image of a continent of gold where there are no ordinary stones. Likewise also, then there is no, there are only pure qualities when delusion is purified. So we should never be discouraged about slow progress, because if we do that, then we're despondent and we have anxiety, and that slows us down further. Rinpoche quotes Milarepa, says, "Do not be impatient to attain enlightenment, but practice until your last breath." So we should be cool, chilled out, but unrelenting. And Rinpoche himself says, "Banishing all hope and all fear, rest in the diamond-like certainty that the primordial simplicity of awareness is itself Buddhahood." That is the way of perfect bliss in which all the qualities of enlightenment will flourish without effort. So with its freedoms and advantages, human life is like a treasure island. People of Tingri do not come back an empty-handed failure. So this golden continent or treasure island is a bit like when we used to have the idea of adventurers and explorers looking for an El Dorado. So presently we have found the El Dorado of precious human rebirth. We should recognize its value and enjoy the treasures of the Dharma. We should not waste these incredibly fortunate circumstances. So we want to appreciate how the human life that we have becomes infinitely precious once we practice the Dharma, when we use it for the purpose of liberation. And here these treasures that will enable us to fully experience the fruition of our luck then is the Hinayana teachings, the Mahayana teachings, and the Vajrayana teachings. And there's none of these that are, you could say, less. They're all essential. We are on a journey that is founded on the Hinayana, consists of the Mahayana, and is, you could say, accelerated through the Vajrayana. So presently then we have the fortune to enjoy these treasures, but we shouldn't be like someone jaded or ignorant who has a jewel in the hand and then thinks, oh, this is just glass, and paying no attention to it, chucks it away. So Rinpoche says very bluntly, do not make such a mistake. The practice of the great vehicle is like a wish-fulfilling gem. People of Tingri, however hard you search, it will be difficult to find again. So the Mahayana teaching is like what we call a wish-granting gem, a chittamani, and will grant us anything we desire. All the conditions now have come together. Now is the time. We shouldn't waste this life, not even a moment. So practicing the teaching will give us all the satisfaction we could ever desire, and it is hence compared to this wish-granting gem. It's a bit like we have the genie in the bottle. So we have encountered a perfect awake teacher. We received the Mahayana teaching. We have extraordinary luck in these conditions coming together. The occurrence of a perfectly enlightened teacher who teaches the path of liberation is rarer than what we call the occurrence of the Udamwara lotus. This is a very rare flower. And what we have then under these extraordinary circumstances is that a Buddha has been born. The Buddha taught the Dharma of transmission and realization is still intact, and we receive this transmission of these two kinds of Dharma from an authentic teacher. We're completely equipped to practice. So rather than fritter away this life, it's only too obvious that we need to practice right now, not losing as much as a second. So, for this life, come what may, you'll have enough to eat and clothe yourself. People of Tingri, put everything you have into practicing the Dharma. So how much food and clothes do we really need? Renunciant practitioners never lack anything. Just focus on the Dharma. So there's only that much that we can consume and that we can spoil ourselves with. All these foods, possessions, and so on, they can only do that much for us. And all we in fact really need is food and shelter. So here we can rely on the Buddha's promise that says, where the Buddha said, no one will ever find the bones of a renunciant who died of hunger and cold. And also if we look in the life of Jigme Gyaltsen Nyugo, according to Nyoshu Khenpo, there's a story of Jigme Gyaltsen Nyugo who practiced and was really on the edge when there was this resounding from the sky where it said, As long as the yogis' samayas are pure, gods and non-humans shall sustain their life. So Jigme Gyaltsen Yogurt turned around and there was a big bowl of yogurt sitting right next to him. Khyentse Rinpoche says, what is the use of hesitating out of concern that you will not have enough to eat, nothing to put on your back, and nowhere to sleep? The Dharma is the best way of using your life. Have no doubt about that. So again, we're not going into, you could say, anything extreme here. We're just talking about making something our priority. So many of us have jobs and responsibilities, so we're not going to leave them behind. But we also know what it's like when we have something that we prioritize that sort of runs as a deep red thread. And that's what we're talking about here. So that's it. And as far as I can see, there are no questions. You're welcome to hit me with questions if you have any. And if not, then we'll conclude. Thanks again for your patience. I've gone a little bit over time here. So thank you very much. By this merit may all attain omniscience, may it defeat the enemy wrongdoing, from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness and death, from the ocean of samsara, may all beings be freed. May bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it has not yet come to be, and where it has arisen, may it never fail, but grow and flourish ever more and more. Thank you.